Hello all the crazy people out there, my name is Michael, I like wizards and dragons and making games, and it is time to continue our deferred renderer in GameMaker. So last we left off, we rendered a couple copies of our scene, and that is going to constitute our geometry buffer, that's going to constitute our diffuse color information, our surface normal information, and, well, depth is going to be included by proxy of the depth buffer in the diffuse color surface, and we don't have to directly worry about that ourselves. Anyway, today it's time to combine all that into a final image, and that is going to be where a little bit more of the math is involved in setting up a deferred renderer. So, let's see. In the post-draw event is where I'm going to be doing all this. I am going to continue drawing our diffuse and normal surfaces in the corner of the screen, just for reference in case we need to debug something later. Let's see. I'm going to go create myself a new shader. I can call this SHD Deferred Combine. Let's bring this up to full screen. I can ignore the vertex shader. I don't care about the vertex shader. The fragment shader is where we're going to be doing all of our work. So let's start by loading in our geometry buffer into the fragment shader. So we've got three things that we need to worry about. We have diffuse color, depth, and normals. We don't actually have to write any code to like stage the diffuse color surface into the shader, because that's what GM_base texture is going to be. So that leaves us, I'm going to need a uniform sampler 2D, let's say samp_depth, and a uniform sampler 2D samp_normal. I can go and, instead of directly assigning the output of this to the GLFrag color output, I can say vec4 color diffuse is going to be what we sample off of GM_base texture. I'm going to delete these spaces around these two arguments. I have no idea why GameMaker's default shader code contains those, because people complain about it constantly, least of all me, and it would take about 5 seconds for GameMaker to just change the default shader text. Anyway, vec4 color, well, I'm going to go vec3 color depth is going to be equal to texture 2D samp_depth, v_v text coord, and vec3 color_normal is going to be texture 2D samp_normal, v_v text coord. I'm going to need these to be .rgb. Okay, so for colored normal, I'm going to need that to be RGB, because the normal is encoded in the red, green, and blue channels of that value, and color_depth, that actually just needs to be a single float. And we can say .r when we sample from that texture, because depth, when you sample it from the depth buffer, is just going to essentially be a float 32 texture instead of an RGB8 texture. I did make a video a few weeks ago when depth buffers in GameMaker first came out on how you can use those. Would recommend going and watching that if you are not familiar, caught up to speed on how you can access the depth textures in GameMaker. I don't want to spend too much time in this video rehashing old ground. Anyway, now that we've got this basic shader set up, this won't actually like do anything because it's not assigning an output color yet, but I can go back to... Okay, that's the G buffer shader. I can go back to the post-draw event where we're actually going to be doing this drawing. Let's say shader set, SHD deferred combine. When we're done with that, SHD... actually, I want shader reset. When we're done with that, we're going to need to insert the surface textures into the sampler somehow. So we can use our good old shader get sampler index SHD deferred combine. The names are going to be samp_depth and samp_normal. We can var sampler depth equals that, and var sampler normal equals that, and we can put our surface textures into these samples with texture set stage. The sampler ID can be sampler_depth, and we can use the surface get texture depth function on our diffuse part of geometry buffer to access the depth buffer, and we can do the same thing with sampler_normal, and we can just use the regular surface get texture function on gbuff_normal. That will grab the texture data from that surface, that will send it to the shader as that sampler index. And that should be all I need to do for the time being here. And with that, we have set up our geometry buffer for access in our deferred combine shader. So we're going to need to do a little bit of processing on normal and depth in order to actually turn them into values that we can actually like make use of in our deferred rendering shader. I'll start with normals because that's going to be a little bit easier. So if you remember how last time we squished our normals so that they fit in a RGB8 color value. So in our deferred combine shader, we're going to need to unsquish that. So I've done this in plenty of videos in the past. If you have never seen this math before, you can probably do some basic algebra to figure out what we're going to do. But in SHD deferred combine, I can say, let's say vec3 fragment normal equals, in parentheses, color normal. I'm going to subtract 0.5, close parentheses, multiply by 2.0. That is going to reverse the operation that we did last time, and that is going to change our normal value into a range of -1, +1, as it should be. Fragment depth. This is going to be a bit more. So when you sample depth off of a depth buffer texture, it is going to be a non-linear depth value. So this is how depth works in computer graphics, generally speaking. So depth is going to be a value between 0 and 1, and it is going to be scaled so that the depth values closer to the camera are given more precision than depth of things that are farther away from the camera. And we're going to want to do an operation which is called linearizing that. I'm actually going to call this linear depth instead of fragment depth. And the way that you would linearize depth is going to be with a little bit of math like this. Again, I talked about how this works in the video on accessing the depth buffer, and I don't really want to run through it again in this video. And I know that people get annoyed at me for doing that, but come on, I gave you the prerequisites last time for a reason. So we can say linear depth equals linearized depth. That's going to take a few parameters. One is going to be the actual depth value that we sampled. One is going to be the camera's near clipping plane, which we're going to eventually have to provide as a uniform to this shader. I'm just going to say u_z near. All my other uniforms are given lowercase names, so let's do that here too. And the third is going to be u_z far. So let's bring those two uniforms into the shader. Uniform float u_z near, uniform float u_z far. These are easy enough to bring into the shader. We can do the thing that we usually do with uniforms. Var u z near equals surface, or equals a shader get uniform, as one does. Where were those values set? Were those just hard-coded? Okay, so field of view, aspect, camera near and far were just hard-coded in when we set the projection in the draw event. Whether that is a good idea, I will let you decide. We can say shader set uniform float. The uniform ID u_z near. The value is 1. We can do the same for far. The value was, I believe, 16,000. And that is going to allow us to turn our the depth that we get straight off the depth buffer into an actual linear depth value. And now, let me actually run the game, and we'll actually render the linear depth of everything that you see to the screen, and this should at least give us a grayscale image. So things that are farther away from the camera are going to be a little bit lighter. Things that are close to the camera are going to be darker. This is a very dark image because apparently the range of 1 to 16,000 is maybe a little bit excessively wide for what we need in the scene. Maybe we can shrink that to like 1 to 10,000 or so, or even 1 to like 8,000, and it would be a little bit brighter without actually losing us any precision. So Let me just do that, see how this looks. Alright. That's just as well. Anyway, that's depth. This would probably be not a bad place for me to drop a little bookmark as a commit. Let's see, what next? So, linear depth here, this still is going to be depth with a value of 0 to 1. That's not quite what we want yet, so I'm going to actually create float fragment depth now, and we want an actual, like, value of how far each fragment is away from you. And that's going to be in, like, actual world space units. So if something is, like, 50 world space units away from your face, you're going to actually want to figure out how to, like, get that value from our linear depth. And that is, that's actually pretty simple. So much like how we, I guess I'll keep using the word un-squished our normal value to change it from a range of 0 to 1 to -1 to 1. We're going to want to change our linear depth from a value of 0 to 1 to a range of near clipping plane to far clipping plane. And the way that we can do that is we can take our linear depth, we can multiply that by z far minus u underscore z near. So now we're going to be in a range of the like the span between our clipping planes, which is going to be 0 to 7,999 in my case. And we can add in z near, and that is going to transform our fragment depth from a range of the near clipping plane to the far clipping plane, so 1 to 8,000, which is the original value that we started with, which we'd like to get back. So now we have the depth of a fragment, and we're going to need to figure out how to go from fragment depth to view space, because remember, we're going to be doing our lighting calculations in view space in this deferred renderer, because it's a little bit more efficient than going all the way back to world space. So the way that we're going to do this is going to be somewhat akin to, basically, if you remember doing a screen coordinates to a world vector calculation, like if you wanted to use the mouse to like click into a 3D world and get the vector that the mouse is pointing in 3D space and that kind of thing, we're going to be doing something like that. So if you remember one of my favorite illustrations of all time, our 3D transformation comic, the 3D transformation pipeline goes that like you start in object space and then you go to world space, view space, normalized device space, and then finally screen space. So if you start off with screen space coordinates, which can be either like the position of the mouse on the screen or v_v texture coordinate in our case. If you want to go back where you came from, you can just reverse the calculations. You can multiply by a couple of inverse matrices here or there. And you can basically unproject a screen space coordinate using the inverse of the camera's projection matrix. And that's what would give you a vector pointing away from the camera in view space of the screen coordinate in question. And if you have the depth of the fragment at that location, you can use that to basically untransform into an exact view space position. So that's great in theory. I am actually not going to do that. I'm going to do something that's quite a bit simpler, and I'll explain how it works once I have finished writing it out. So let me write a function. I'm going to call this vec3 get vs position, and this can take a couple of arguments. One of them is going to be, let's say float. Float, that's not how you spell float. That's also not how you spell float. Float, fragment depth. Let's say we're going to want a vector 2 for, let's call it a screen position. And I think I'm also going to want a vector 2 for, in my original video on deferred renderers, I called this something like, I think, FOV_scale. And I guess I might as well do that here as well. So we can return a value. We're going to return a vector 3, which is going to be composed from FOV_scale multiplied by screen position. I'm going to subtract 0.5 from screen position, multiply by 2.0, and multiply by fragment depth. And since this is going to be a vector 2 in total, because screen position is a vector 2, and we're going to be doing a bunch of scalar operations on it, it's going to spit out a vector 2. We're going to need a third value on the end of that, and that is going to be fragment depth as well. If this expression looks a little bit familiar, it's basically the same thing that we're doing to fragment normal down here. Screen position is going to be a vector 2 with a range of 0 to +1. To convert that into normalized device coordinates, we're going to need -1 to +1. So we're going to be doing basically the same bit of arithmetic as we did down here. FOV scale, I'll get into assigning this a value in a minute, but this is going to be the field of view on both the X and the Y. I'm like gesturing in the air with my hand for some reason. Normally you would think of field of view as like a single number, and you would think of the camera's projection as like a field of view and an aspect ratio, but you could also think of it as a two separate field of view numbers, one for the x-axis, one for the y-axis. And if you have an aspect ratio of 16:9 and your field of view on the y-axis is like 16 or 60 degrees rather, that means that your field of view on the x-axis would be something like 60 divided by 1.7-ish is like 35, 36 degrees. Anyway, when you multiply that by the normalized device coordinate -1 to +1 and multiply the fragment depth, you could think of what we're doing as like taking a point on the camera's near clipping plane, drawing a line from the camera's position through that point on the near clipping plane into space somewhere, and that line is going to have a length of fragment depth, and where that line stops is going to be our view space position. And that is going to allow us to reconstruct view space position from depth, screen position, and our field of view. By the way, I've been told that if you're doing this on an OpenGL exporter of GameMaker, so Linux, Mac, HTML5, OpenGX, basically anything that isn't Windows-based, your field of view Y will be reversed, and that is going to be because of differences between the way DirectX and OpenGL handle like screen transformations. And if you're working on an OpenGL graphics target for GameMaker, you're going to need to reverse the FOV scale.y. You're going to need to like multiply that by -1. Let's see, the easiest way to check for that automatically without having to like remember to go in and change your values depending on which export of GameMaker you're using would be to check for a defined macro, a preprocessor macro that GameMaker will stick in shaders when it compiles it. You can use a couple handy preprocessor tricks to do this. So if not defined YYHLSL, you can just reverse the field of view on the y-axis like this. If you've never played around with preprocessor tricks in shaders like this, don't worry about it. I've also been told that this is also true for when you're building for PlayStation. So you're going to need to check for a YY PlayStation shader language definition. But again, that is not something I've been able to check myself. Console development tends to be rather fraught with non-disclosure agreements, so it's not something that there's a ton of information publicly available about. But anyway, this function is going to let us, let's say vec3 view position equals get vs position. The fragment depth can be just fragment depth. Our screen position is just going to be v_v text coord, and our FOV scale is going to be another uniform that I'll provide. Let's see, uniform vec2 u FOV scale. This would be a good time to set some value to u_FOV scale. So let's once again go back to our post-draw event where we're doing this. I'm going to borrow u_FOV scale. Grab that uniform. We can shader set uniform f u_FOV scale and two values. So this isn't actually going to be like -60 and then whatever else I said, multiplying the field of view by the aspect ratio. So again, this was hard-coded, right? So our field of view is 60 degrees-ish. Let's say the field of view is 60, our aspect equals 16/9. What I'm actually going to want to set this value to is going to be the degree tangent of degree tangent, thank you, dtan of field of view divided by 2. And I'm going to want to multiply that by The aspect ratio, I'm also going to want, because this is GameMaker and you just have to accept some level of weirdness, negative field of view divided by 2 in the degree tan function, and then you're going to multiply that by the aspect ratio. In my original deferred renderer video, there was a math error, and I think what I was doing is I was multiplying that by the aspect inside the dtan function, and it wasn't actually super noticeable, but basically there would be some amount of error in the calculation the farther away you get from the center of the screen, and I didn't notice it just by looking at it, but some other people did, and that was something that had to be corrected. So pay attention to where you put your parentheses there, and the field of view on the y is just going to be degree tangent of FOV divided by 2, and that's it. We don't have to multiply by anything there, and that is going to allow us to finish converting into view space position. If you wanted to visualize this, you could say GL_frag color equals view position with 1 on the alpha channel, and that will basically create a couple of magenta, blue, cyan, and white quadrants on the screen. If you want a slightly easier on the eyes visualization of this, maybe we can divide by like 100, and that will all right, that'll render the scene in like view space position. It looks kind of weird, doesn't it? But let's see. You know what? Just because I'd like to check, do a little sanity check that I didn't make some error somewhere, I'm actually going to go create myself a third G buffer surface, and that is just going to be view space position. People ask how to debug stuff in shaders, and a good way to do that is to just, like, draw values to the screen, which sounds stupid, but, if I set to the second MRT index, VS position, and if I were to go into the gbuff shader and GL_frag data index 2 can be, we don't have VS base position, so I'm going to need to supply it. Varying vec3 v, what would it be? GM matrices world view multiplied by the object space position, and we're just going to grab the .xyz of that and bring that back into the fragment shader, and we can just set GL_frag data index 2 to this a vector 4 of that divided by 100 so that we can see it a little better, and 1 on the alpha channel. And then in post-draw, let us actually draw that surface. Okay, how does that look? Okay, it looks like that is actually upside down, and I have a feeling I dropped a minus sign somewhere. And I have a feeling I know what it is. Let's not negate field of view on the X, and let's actually negate field of view on the Y. Okay. And now we have the view space position approximately being reconstructed correctly. So white in the upper left, upper right, I mean blue in the lower left. Yeah. To make matters more confusing, if you assemble the expression when you reconstruct view space position like this in a slightly different way, you actually can come out with something where you need the X field of view to be negated and not the Y. That's gotten me on a number of occasions, hence why I like to have this as a sanity check. Let's see, where were we? Would that be a good place for another commit? And shortly after that, my recording got messed up, and I'm once again, for like the third week in a row, finding myself sitting at my computer in the early hours of the morning trying to put something together. Anyway, we now have the normal, the depth, and the view space position derived from the depth of every fragment of whatever we're trying to draw in our deferred renderer, and honestly, it's all downhill from here. Lighting calculations and whatever are a little bit more math heavy, but they're also things that you, I'm sure, have done about 1,000,000 times prior to this. So I should be able to forge ahead with directional lights, point lights, and fog. So I think I'm going to do them in that order. I'm also going to just, for the sake of time, hard code in certain values into my shader. The only things I'm not going to hard code into the shader, I think, are going to be the directional light's direction and the point light's position in space, because those are the values that we're going to have to transform in GML into view space. So let's start with the directional light. So how does this go? This usually is going to go something like, let's say vec3 ambient light, and that can be, let's make that like 10% gray. Vec3 of 0.1. I like 10% gray as my ambient light. Makes things easy. Next, I'm going to say vec3 light total. We can initialize that to ambient light. I think I'm going to define my directional lights. Let's make the directional lights color. Vec3 direction. I don't want to have to spell out another really long variable name a million times. Let's call it dir light color. And we can make this, how about 0.8, 80% gray. Alright, so I'm going to need the directional light's direction passed in as a uniform. As I mentioned, uniform vec3 u light direction. Should I set up my other uniform? Uniform vec3 u light point. I guess I might as well. I'll do those at the I'll do the point lights, you know, right after this. Anyway, where does it go? Float n dot l. This is going to be the dot product of the fragment normal. Dot product it against the direction of the directional light. This is a value that you should make sure is normalized. It is slightly more computationally efficient if you normalize this in GML before you pass it to the shader as a uniform. You're probably also going to want to negate that. And I realized far later than I should that you can also do the negation on the GML side when you pass it in as a uniform, and that will serve as a little micro optimization if you don't want to have to do that negation in the shader. But anyway, we're also going to want to take the max of 0 and that, because the light is pointing in the opposite direction of a face. You don't want it to have negative light. That doesn't make any sense. And we can say light total plus equals our directional light color multiplied by n dot l. And that is a basic directional light. Good fun. At the end, the way that one would often do this would be something like vec3 final color. And that can be the diffuse color .rgb multiplied by the light total. In the event that this goes over like 100%, I guess we should also light total equals min vector3 of 1 and light total, and that will clamp our light total. Generally a good idea. And then we can take our final color and assign gl underscore frag color to a vector4 composed of our final color and 100% transparency. Okay, let's see. The next thing we're going to have to do before we can run this and expect any results is go into our post draw event. Let's go grab ourselves a uniform for our light direction. What did I call that uniform? U underscore light direction. That makes sense. And we can set the direction of our light to the shader using that uniform. So what should our light direction be? I do like, and I know I've said this a bunch of times in the past, when I go and test a basic lighting system, I do like setting my light direction to just -1, -1, -1, or something similar to that. And honestly, it's just force of habit. But this is going to be a direction in world space. If I were to just insert this into the shader as it is, light dx dy dz, and run the game now, we're going to see that we're doing our lighting calculations in view space, or at least trying to, and now when I move the camera, different sides of objects are going to be lit, which is not usually how you want lighting to behave. You usually want a directional light to stay put when you turn the camera, and admittedly that does look kind of cool in the like disco ball sort of sense, but it doesn't look good at all in the like lighting behaves this way in the real world sense. Anyway, we're going to need to transform this into a into view space, and To do that, of course, this is going to be basically the same process as transforming anything else from world space into view space. And for example, a vertex shader, you can multiply anything you want by a world view or projection matrix to convert it into the appropriate coordinate space. So in this case, the relevant matrix that you want to multiply by is the camera's view matrix. Let's see. Are we when we... Okay, so in this sample project, when we go and render the scene originally to the G buffer, the view matrix of the camera is saved to an instance variable, which we can just retrieve later. So that's apparently something I had the foresight to do earlier. But anyway, there's a handy function, matrix transform vertex. This is basically a vector 4 multiplied by a 4x4 matrix function. Anyway, we can... What is it? mat_view. We can take this function, we can multiply by our view matrix, and we can say light dx, light dy, light dz. You can also optionally pass a homogeneous coordinate into the matrix transform vertex function. By default, it's 1. It's going to assume that you want to transform a point in space. We want to transform a normal in space, so we can go and give that a little homogeneous coordinate of 0. This should look very familiar if you've ever written a vertex shader. Matrix transform vertex is going to return an array of 3 values. Does it actually return a w coordinate? Apparently it does, and also the the built-in documentation for that function is wrong because this is x, y, z, z. Someone was copying and pasting, but anyway, var transformed light direction. That is a really long variable name. All right, let's just go with transformed. Anyway, this is going to return an array of 4 elements. We can take index 1, index 0, index 1, index 2. We can feed that into the shader as a uniform.
Hey.
That is our final light direction in view space. And now when I run the game, we are going to have, if I can zoom out so we can see more of the scene at once, if I rotate the camera, the light is going to stay put. That is the correct behavior of a directional light. And we are now doing lighting calculations in view space. That's a whole lot of fun. All right. So that's going to be our directional light. Our point light is going to be similar. It's basically a directional light, except the light direction is the direction from the light's origin to the fragment. And there's a bit of an attenuation factor that you can apply. Let's see. That is going to be... I'm just going to insert a bunch of spaces here. Let's say vec3 point light color. What do I want the point light color to be? Like, I could make this also a grayscale value, but I think let's go with another color. It's hard to think of a color that's actually going to make sense here, because the entire scene is mostly green. But let's make it, how about a yellow or something? What's that going to be? The high red, high green, low blue. So let's make it like 0.8 red, 0.9 green, and like 0.1 blue. Okay. I'm also going to hard code the point light radius. Float point radius. This can be, I'll make this 500 or so. 5,000. I'll make it 500. Let's see. Vec3L. Our light direction for a point light is going to be the location of the point light in space, and we're going to subtract from that our view space position. Should I call this view position? How about... Alright, I'm going to call it fragment position. I should have called it that in the first place, because everything else is called, like, fragment this or fragment that. Anyway, we're going to take our point light position, subtract our fragment position. We're going to want to normalize this so that that becomes a vector from point A to point B instead of, like, the actual distance in space. Alright, n dot L is going to be the dot product of our fragment normal. Dotted against L there. That needs to be capital L. Because this is the light's position and then you subtract the fragment position, you don't actually have to negate this here. If you reverse the subtraction, if you reverse the order of the operands here, fragment position minus light position, you would have to negate the L. There's no reason you would want to do that, but that's just a little fun algebra fact. Let's see, I'm also going to need the actual distance from the fragment to the light position. I can say not a vector, but a float distance is going to be the distance from... I'm just going to copy and paste these because I'm not going to spell either of those correctly if I try to do it myself. Oh, I also need to take the max of that dot product in 0 once again, because if they're pointing in opposite directions, you'll get a negative number, which doesn't make sense. And we will also want our attenuation factor, which is going to be, glancing at my notes on the other screen, float attenuation. That is going to be point radius minus our distance. See, I can't even spell that correctly. We're going to divide that difference by our point radius. This should be clamped between 0 and 1. Alright, anyway, we can once again do our little lighting model thing. Light total plus equals our, what is it, point light color multiplied by n dot L multiplied by our attenuation factor. And that is going to compute us a little directional light. Should I comment out or a point light rather, should I comment out the directional light so that we can see its full effect? I think I will. I'll bring it back in a minute. Anyway, let's go over to GML, land, and we can do the same thing, assigning our uniforms for our point light. Where do I want to make the point light like exist in space? It has a radius of 500, right? So that should be like it should be fairly big. It should affect more than a tiny part of the map. But if I make light X say 100, light Y 150, light Z equals 200. So we are once again going to need to transform this value into view space, but instead of transforming a vector, homogeneous coordinate 0, we're going to be transforming a point instead. So matrix transform vertex, our view matrix, light X, light Y, light Z. Again, the homogeneous coordinate would be 1. That is what it is by default, so you can omit it in this case. And let's grab that return value, and we can shader set uniform float to our point light value. We can say, and everything else is the same, the transformed index 0, index 1, index 2. All right, so that's going to be our point light. What's happened to n.l? Oh, because, yeah, up there, float n.l. Okay, fine. The only line I actually need to comment out is that one. Variable not declared properly and whatnot. Anyway, we can see that our point light lives approximately where I'm standing, I think. I think it's like right above this specific clump of trees. If I walk away, it's not going to move with us, which is generally what you want. If I turn the camera, it's not going to rotate with the camera, which is generally what you want. All right. Let's see. The rest of the scene is very dark because I did comment out this directional light component. If we put them together, it's going to be a little bit more, shall we say, interesting. All right, we've got lighting. Very nice. So fog is going to be last. That is something that you're going to want to do after your final color has taken the lighting into account. Fog, of course, is basically a lerp from the actual color to the fog color, depending on the distance. Let's see, I'm going to hard code some values. Let's make vec3 fog color. What color do we want to make the fog? Should I be boring and make it white like it usually is? Like, you would hardly notice it if it was black because that's the ambient color is pretty dark itself. But if I made it like red or yellow, that would be a little bit intimidating. But how about like light blue? That can be 0 and maybe like 0.81. Let's say float fog start can be, where do we want fog to start fading at? How about 600 world space units away? Float fog end. This can be, how about 3000 world space units away? Next, we're going to need to compute our fog fraction, which is, we're going to be using fragment depth. So where is that? That is after we linearize our depth and transform that into like actual distance. But before we use that to derive the fragment position, we can say fragment depth. I'm just gonna call this fraction. Is going to be this minus fog underscore start. Take all that, divide by fog end minus fog start. We're going to want to clamp this between a value of 0 and 1. And now we have our fraction, which is going to be 0 if the fragment is at the fog start bound, 1 if the fragment is at the fog end bound, and somewhere in the middle if it's somewhere in the middle. And now we can just say final color equals lerp equals mix final color to our fog color based on our fraction. Okay. We now have lighting and fog in our deferred render, assuming I did not make any typos which caused the shader to fail to compile, which it does not look like I did. Alright, that's pretty exciting. We've got ourselves some fog over trees. That actually looks like better than I thought it would. I know roughly what a color is going to be if you just type in a hex code or if you just type in like a set of numbers like this. But since I just made that up on the spot, I was kind of expecting it to just look like a little off, but that actually doesn't look bad. Alright, deferred rendering. That's pretty fun. So there's a couple of other things I'd like to make videos on when it comes to deferred rendering. In my original videos on this, I just kind of left it here, but I would like to probably talk about transparency in deferred rendering, because that's, as I mentioned, just all kinds of cursed. And I think it would also be fun if we could talk a little bit about like how well the system handles a large number of lights compared to a forward renderer. So I don't know if that'll be the next video I make, or if I'm just gonna give it a rest and do something else for a little bit. But that should be a whole ton of fun. Until then, my name is Michael. I like wizards and dragons and making games. If you want the code for this, look for the GitHub repository down in the description of the video. I suppose we might as well make our final commit. I like to post videos on the weird stuff you can do in GameMaker, so if you're interested in any 3D stuff or shader stuff like this, feel free to subscribe. I have a Patreon, so if you want to contribute to the channel, links to that can be found in all the usual places as well. You should all go check out the Steam page for Wizarducks and the Lost Hat, which is the game that I like to work on when I'm not doing YouTube stuff. That would be this guy. Note the lack of a hat. Link to that Steam page can be found down in the description of the video as well. I hope you all found this useful, and I will see you all later. Special thanks to Zenjamin, VitroV, Squarecrow, Manta Ray, GameMaker, Edward Holt, and DJ Gibbles for supporting these videos. If you want to help out, head on over to the Patreon page down in the video description to join the fun.